Good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, everybody. Welcome to In Between. This is Eat the Storms, a poetry podcast. My name is Damien B. Donnelly, and we are in between the end of Season 8 and the start of Season 9, revisiting our Behind the Storms chats. These are standalone episodes which solely feature the conversations I've had with one guest from each episode last season, and also features them reading their poetry. Who wants to wait until September till the podcast comes back, when we can simply revisit and celebrate the people that make this podcast possible? And also, of course, that means you, the listeners, for tuning in. And thank you for doing that on platforms like Spotify, Apple, Google, Breaker, Podbean, Player FM, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Castbox, Podcast Music, iTunes, Amazon Music, and now YouTube. And breathe. Today's episode first aired on the 17th of February, when our conversation bridged the gap between the east coast of Ireland and the west coast of the United States with the one, the only, the incredible Karen Pierce Gonzalez. So if you're ready, if the tea is brewed, the dessert has been divvied out and the outside world has been put on pause, then my name is Damien B. Donnelly. This is Eat the Storms, and I hope you enjoy the show. Now, I am delighted to welcome back to the podcast today Karen Pierce Gonzalez, who you've already heard, of course, earlier in this episode, reading from her latest chapbook, Coyote in the Basket of My Ribs, which was published by Kelsey Books. And Karen is joining us today to take part in Behind the Storms, our new interview series, which is looking at beginnings, on how, on why, on the reasons that we all got interested in poetry in the first place and creation. So Karen, thank you so much for joining me today, all the way from the Bay Area of San Francisco to here in Ireland. It's lovely to have you with me.
It is such a delight to be here, my friend. I love the work you do, and I love how you support others. Thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure. And unfortunately, our listeners are not going to be able to take in the view that I'm seeing. Not only do you have the best blow dry in town, but you also have some of the most incredible art, your own artwork on the walls behind you, because you're not just a poet, you're also a visual artist. And what I'm seeing is something that, people who know you, I'm sure, have already seen. A little bit of a background, I suppose. So you're the author of 5 chapbooks, including True North, Sightings from the Star Wheel, and of course, most recently, Coyote in the Basket of My Ribs. But as I said, you're also a visual artist. Currently, you're adorning the front cover of the Chestnut Review, Volume 5, Issue 3. It looks amazing. And of course, you were a fantastic stormer last year with 2 of your photographs decorating Issue 3 of the Storms Are Printed Journal. So,
Hey!
yay, indeed. So with that all in mind and gathering it all together, let's try and journey back a little bit to the beginning before we talk about the collection itself. How in all of that did it all get started from, I suppose, not just the poetry, but the creation, the artwork, and even the interest, I suppose, in folklore? Your handle is Folk Hearts Press. So
Right.
tell us how this all comes about and the juggling of it all.
Yeah, let me start with this. I grew up in a community of immigrants. My mother's family were Spanish Jews from the island of Rhodes, and they married. And so in those marriages, there were people from Egypt and Libya and France and Israel and all over the world. So I grew up in a subculture with different holidays. Right? I learned Hebrew, and with people with different accents from different parts of the world. So it's very comfortable for me. Even your little sweet Irish accent is very wonderful to hear. So I was no stranger to the other than, to the small group with the broken words and the traditions and whatnot. But they were separate from mainstream. So there's always been 2 rivers. There's been mainstream and there's been the non-mainstream. Okay, ever since I can remember, I have written. Now, my first poetry book was Cat in the Hat, Dr. Seuss.
Wow!
And I'll never forget the brilliant wordplay And that's what and the lyrical quality of that wordplay. Now, as I grew up, I would read books and then rewrite them.
To put it into your phrasing, or
to put it into my phrasing, and I would notice techniques and mechanics in the books. They were kids' books, so they weren't like voluminous novels. But back up, in the backdrop, there was a tremendous amount of abuse and dysfunction. So I learned early to stay inside. It was just the best place for me to be. It's where the stars could reach me most quickly, because I would talk to them and they would, call a response back, and I would stay there, right? So, so I would rewrite, and then obviously through school, I was encouraged in school settings I was writing scripts in the 4th grade for Friday afternoon theater. I mean, it just was, I didn't have guidance, so I didn't know what not to do. I didn't know what I couldn't do. Yeah. Right? I only just knew to do.
But suddenly, I think the worst thing about learning sometimes is to have a rule book and be given the rules and be told, like, these are your parameters and you need to stay within them. When you don't have that, it's anything and everything.
Right. And because I didn't show many things to many people, I was not on public display. Right. So I was safe. I mean, I kept safe. So anyway, life goes on, and there were tragedies like what happened in the coyote in the basket of my ribs. I had deep pockets inside, like a honeycomb, where things could be stored and kept safe. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, simultaneously, I have to survive in the 3D world, get good grades, whatever, function, keep myself safe, become fiscally responsible, do all these things, while inside was an interior, just a sea of constellation stories.
What's extraordinary in what you're saying there is so many artists, so many definitely writers who I've spoken to, and even myself, we create these pockets that are extraordinary on the inside as a diversion from all that's not extraordinary and all that's too difficult on the outside. But yet, within that almost dark space, lights are created. Like you said yourself, stars, easier to touch the stars.
Yes, well, I mean, I kept breathing. I was kept breathing. I was kept moving. So almost like a warrior stance, I would just get bumped and battered and keep moving. Thank God for that. And I didn't know what I was doing because I was just doing what I needed to do. So then I get to college, and I'm taking creative writing classes, and I noticed I am a horrible groupie. You do not want me to be your fan, because if it's not natural, it's really a bad experience for both of us. Mm-hmm. So I remember reading poetry, but it was, we loved the classics. They were all people like Lord Byron who were so well connected and socially positioned that who knows if their work would have had merit without that. And I remember thinking, oh, this is not right. So I went away from studying the poets and the writers, and I found myself, thank you, E.E. Cummings, getting into linguistics, the nature of language. And so I learned Homeric Greek, I learned Latin, I already had my Hebrew, I already knew my Spanish. Not too much else really, but California Indian languages. So because of the anthropological component, I live in California, where we have probably 43 nations in this state. My anthro professor, whom I was her assistant, wrote the grammar for the Shasta Indian language. So point being, for example, they may not have our Indo-European male-female. They may have short-long. They may have a base 5 number system, not a base 10 number system. So worlds opened up, worlds of possibility, inspired fundamentally by E.E. Cummings and the way he fractured language. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And it's not that I liked all of his poems, but the ones that I was drawn to, I used to read them to my daughter when she was taking a bath. In just spring, when the world is mud luscious, the little lame balloon man whistles far, and we and Eddie and Bill come running from piracies. I mean, it's just, she still remembers those poems, right? They still, poor kid. But anyway, so then I got into linguistics, and that took me right into my anthropological leaning into folklore. Mm-hmm. And once again, folklore is the street face of mythology. It's for the common man. It's for the proletariat, the plebeian. It's how they view the world and pass on their wisdom. It's not necessarily cosmology. Right? So I would look at the way different cultures would do their foods and what it meant. And once again, I'm in the Bay Area, which is about as diverse. Thank God, left coast. I'll never leave the left coast of this country, ever. Mm-hmm. So then I got my degrees, both of them special majors, in the things that interested me. And then I went on to become a journalist, which I swore I'd never do, because I felt like a sellout. And besides that, I don't care about the news. I'm not into politics. However, I created my own beat. So I worked for the San Francisco Chronicle, which is the 12th largest paper in the United States. And I also worked for the Marin Independent Journal. And my beat, anthropological, cultural, spiritual communities. I had tea with Thich Nhat Hanh. I met with the Dalai Lama twice. And my job was to translate what they had to say into non-fear-based 7th grade Mr. and Mrs. Middle America language. So I was just pioneered. I mean, I not that I knew what I was doing, and I just was doing. But anyway, so it introduced me to many different worldviews again, how they express themselves. So bottom line, poets all over the world. This is a very rich place to live in. It's a very rich world we live in. And we're gifted with opportunities and experiences that thread. I mean, like I said earlier, I don't take credit for the weave. I take credit for the work.
But the work is like you said, I don't know how I get into it. I didn't want to get into journalism, but you didn't get into journalism because you didn't specifically study to be a journalist, because you went in and brought the you with you. And as you said, you made the beat, it
exactly.
wasn't journalism. It was learning how to understand, to see what was going on around you and translate that to others.
It was amazing because I was being sought, I was being reached out for. And then along the way, I'm still writing magazine articles and short stories. So still keeping the genres fluid. I didn't really come back to poetry until after my years having a public relations company boutique in which I represented cultural communities.
I can imagine during all this, because while you're writing, while you're listening, there are so many visuals that you must just be impacted with continuously. Like, I was wondering about, when sort of the visual arts came into it, but clearly there's already a nesting period happening because you're speaking in so many different nationalities, cultures, languages.
Exactly. And then keep in mind, I meditate. So when I meditate, it's more shamanic, and no, I don't use substance. I just use discipline. Shamanic, I enter into the ocean and am with the leatherback turtle. I am on the tundra with the caribou. I am there in the weave of a tapestry whose strings are dangling. I am right there in the room where it happens. And I don't always immediately act on it because I integrate it. Sometimes I'll spend, I spent probably 2 weeks with the leatherback turtle in meditation, understanding how it moves. It doesn't have a hard shell. And it never stops moving. And I thought, that's why we are connected, because I never stop moving. Mm-hmm. Okay, so these are personal lessons, but they're also artistic lessons too.
Then you come along to Coyote in the Basket of My Ribs, and also and with art too. There's certainly then a connection. Clearly, there comes a point where you are thinking, no, now I want to share something. Now it's no longer just about understanding, learning, soaking up. Now there is something that's coming out, maybe from that pocket of where I've stored everything earlier on. Suddenly I'm coming out of it. I was reading in the blurbs, our dear friend Marcelle Newbold, poet, former managing editor of Nightingale and Sparrow. She said in the blurb, "This is an exquisite exploration of restlessness." She said, "Your dream poems are intertwined with a delicate, involving understanding of loss, of dependency on the just out of reach." And it's a collection that comprises of just 26 poems, I think, but it borders on epic. There are terrifying images at times. The image of the carnivore who cuts its teeth on the raw edges of your heart, intertwined with images of the wild, reckless coyote against this child, this adolescent, this adult, for having perhaps their own tug of war with the frustration of the fact that spring doesn't come with its own rebirth. There are impeccable losses that won't be cured. Tell us about this wet, lone desert dog.
So, coyote is miraculous because coyote is a messenger between life and death. It is one of the few mythic animals that can travel back and forth seamlessly. Yeah. And coyote originally appeared years ago, and I wrote a couple poems, and I kept writing them, 2 or 3 versions, and then just stopped, right? But as I grew older, as I aged so eloquently, I even get a discount at the grocery store. I'm a senior now. But coyote is, like in the poem where coyote cuts the edges of my heart like they were pie crust. Mm-hmm. It is only because coyote is young and restless that coyote doesn't do so to hurt. Mm-hmm. And so there's an understanding of the element, the supranatural, not supernatural, supranatural element of this particular animal spirit. And so I would follow it around. Not really clear where it was going, but I knew it was an opus.
Yeah.
Okay, I knew it was important work. And let me tell you real quickly in the backlog, the backstory. I don't put it in the book because all of my chapbooks are tributes to some source other than myself. So it's not about what happened to me. So coyote comes from when I was a child. My mother and my sister went to the store for me, and my sister never came back. And things just got further and deeper and more painfully falling apart-ish at that time. So coyote was a soothe, a balm, because coyote travels back and forth and never dissolves. Mm. Coyote is always there. So when I was able to, I think the anniversary of my sister's death, but by the way, interestingly, I finished the collection the day of her birthday. I thought that was really interesting. Mm. And it got accepted for publication on her birthday, right? So, and then the month that she died in, which was February, is when it met the world. So I just trusted the journey, really not knowing, because it's dreamscape. There's a safety in dreamscape. Yeah. No one can say it is this or it is that or it's not. I mean, there is a safety mechanism, and working on that sort of landscape, that kind of terrain, that dreamy terrain. So coyote I loved coyote, just like I loved my sister. And so I would follow coyote, and sometimes she would mislead me, sometimes she would take me, sometimes she would guard me, sometimes she would play with me, but I always had her. Mm-hmm. And she became a substitute in a way for my sister. So I never, even though I lost her, I didn't really lose her. Mm-hmm. And through coyote, I was able to always travel back and forth to her presence in my life, and its power and its beauty, right? And its undeniably magical existence in my life.
And I think I was talking with Susan Richardson last week, and she was also talking about her collection and talking about the loss of her mother. And I think certain things come along, whether it's a collection, whether it's a painting, at a time when it's supposed to come along. You know, it's not the minute the loss has happened. It's not a day later, a year later. Sometimes it's 10, sometimes it's 20 years later.
Exactly.
You know, I think we're in that numbed, almost protective mode for such a long time that it becomes difficult to translate anything or to hear what we're actually saying. And perhaps it comes at the time that we need it most, later.
Yes. Yeah, and I think you're right about that. And I know for myself, again, because I was through trial and error, so many genres, I was confident I could weave it together. Yeah. I just didn't know what the weave would be.
It is an extraordinary opus. You were talking about earlier in terms of the interconnectedness of things. I'm always intrigued. Joni Mitchell is a huge, Joni Mitchell was the one person, I think the reason I started writing is because of Joni Mitchell. She said in a comment during one interview, I don't know what comes first, the writing or the painting. And I find it funny that very few people know of her painting. Like she painted most of her album covers. She's had huge exhibitions all around the world, but she said she didn't know which came first, that there was all, after she'd finished maybe writing an album, then she'd go and she'd into her studio, she'd paint for a month, a year, and then she'd write again and then the painting. But she never know what started it off, whether it was the painting that started as the poetry or the poetry that started the writing. I know that she wanted to be a dancer originally, but then she got polio when she was a young kid, and that, crushed all those dreams. So I suppose the expression came in a different way. But I was wondering for you, is there always an interconnectedness between writing and visual, or is there a separation?
Yeah. What I want to say, first of all, is she is probably one of the lyricists I admire most in the world. Mm-hmm. Hers is poetry, bar none. So back to the question. Sometimes the work floats in different rivers.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a big boat in one and a small raft in the other, but they are moving together. Although I can't always see them together. The Ajna River, is a mythic place where Ganesh comes out and Kuan Yin and masculine and feminine move past their obstacles to unite and to be open to all that is. It's not a gender thing. It's an energetic thing. And the work is in the Ajna River, and I never know where the bends are going to be. Sometimes the canoe topples over, right? And I end up on the shore with a piece because that's its life. Mm-hmm. And I trust that. Mm-hmm. I do create simultaneously work where there's visual and verbal, written work, but it's never intentional. I don't have to have an agenda like I did as a journalist or whatever. So I am free to just go with whatever. Sometimes it can only be expressed in color or in language. Some things come in sound. You hear the waves, and I know this is, I experience this with your work. The waves come in at different frequencies, different colors, different vibrations. So to surf them and let them expand themselves and evolve is really something. And sometimes it means a physical art piece, and sometimes it doesn't. But most of my physical art piece based on elements in the natural world, tree bark and things like that are already alive too. We just find a common ground where we meet. But sometimes they're separate because they're different realities. Language is very different from color, from shape, right? And my hope is to one day be mistress of both.
I think that's a title you can claim pretty much right now. It's not just for you to trust the process. It's to trust the moment. It's to trust the movement. You trust in the flow, and you don't seem to be distracted or knocked by where it's supposed to take you. You're willing to go on the journey. And I think for writers, for any kind of creator, I think that's a huge learning curve that we cannot necessarily see the end of the beginning. It
No.
will go where it's meant to go, or it will end, like you said, and you upturning and you're left on the shore.
And then think about it, my friend. If you put it on paper or you read it out loud, those fibers emit back out into the world. And they do their work as sound, as only sound can do. And you, of course, the master of sound, I love listening to you read. You understand that there's a quality, there's an energetic vibration to the sounds that just move the world along. Yeah. We live in an amazing place, this earth, you know?
We do. And, you know, I think a huge majority of us appreciate it. But I think there are few that continue its creation and take it from the land and take it into the palm of their hand and nurture that.
Yeah.
You do that. And thank you so much for doing it.
Well, it's really a blessing to do it. It feeds me. Can I read you one poem?
Yes.
Do you mind if I read you a poem, a new poem? So, Damien, this poem is part of a series, and that's another thing. I work in series with art and with writing, so I'm not attached to it being a certain something. So when the energy arises for that content, I have a series ongoing, so there's always room. So this is a series based on the Olmec deities, and I want to read it because I just finished it, and I'm excited. And so this is an Olmec, for people who don't know, is a pre-Mesoamerican culture. So think Indo-European is the equivalent on this continent in the United States. Feathered Olmec serpent, Quetzalcoatl. 1. You coil up the roots of my too deep sleep. Slowed, I am most willing to roll under the mirrored shield of your blue belly, branching towards red and gold throat plumage. As you shed cooled lava of royal obsidian on my pillow, the translucent casing coats me, wets down the woven silk threads that keep my head above waters ageless and cold. You spiral my spine, head to toe, you know exactly where you are going. I gurgle, slip into the underwater bed, seagrass patterns crisscross. Tectonic plates push me to float on my back. 2. Your snake tongue licks mine, each exhale of satiny breath, a fitted sheet of warm air that stretches over ribbed ocean ridges, undulating fathoms below. Double-fanged in the dark, you turn on me, drain primal fears of dying. Siphoned, my veined liquid squirts right into your mouth. You swallow my mineral-rich humanity. Spit out wanted prayers wasted for the dead. Still living, you hiss. Arms raised, I hold on to the spread of your ancient neck, glide skyward. 3. The arc of my night changes. I slither up your sacred scales, become a body reborn to soar. On a cumulus cloud, I watch you circle back to pluck field rats nesting in my fallen hair. Core-boned, jaws open wide, you eat them whole, regretting only that you cannot gorge more.
The line probably I'm going to take from that and apply it to you is, I am most willing.
Yes. Oh,
And
Wow,
you
thank
are
you.
to see, to take it, to hold it, to share it.
Thank you. Thank you, my friends. And thank you kindly to your listeners who I hope love you as much as I do.
Thank you
Oh
so
my
much.
God. You are welcome, my friend.
And now with Poems from Coyote in the Basket of My Ribs, we welcome back Karen Pierce Gonzalez.
It is such a privilege to be here today with you on this Eat the Storms podcast, which is itself a work of art. I'm going to read selections from Coyote in the Basket of My Ribs, which is a tribute to the mythical coyote messenger who travels seamlessly between life and death and once helped me navigate that wilderness. Coyote Dream 1. Fitful, in a den of sleep, taut coyote muscles twitch beneath my skin. Spine arches, I pull blankets back. Impatient paws push away my dream of domesticity. To chase a deer running down a hillside that slides into a sea coyote cannot swim. Still, panting, she reaches the other shore. To sleep, I try again, count sheep, but stop when the wet, lone desert dog howls. Meadowed flocks are not to her liking. She prefers uneven edges of nightfall. Its darkness dissolves the calm of my certainty about which shadows are tame enough to clothe and feed, to give pen, paper, and paintbrush to. Not every pocket of inner wilderness is meant to stay wild, is it? I am jolted by the squeal of dawn's fast-moving tires turning the corner. Ears perked, I yell, run! And Coyote does, before daybreak can fold her back into the sheets of the bed I have made. A photo marked only kids. No mention of why we gathered that late summer afternoon in the yard, a yellowed patch of stubbed grass sticking up through dry clay. Us poised by a blue and white Fairlane parked on the road because our neighborhood didn't have driveways. That morning, my sister was placed in a pauper's plot, 4 rows up from a statue of lambs with Jesus, who was not her shepherd. She was the only one of this gaggle missing. Lanky girls in floral dresses, scuffed brown shoes, husky boys in pants too short or too long. But I see her in the corner of this black and white image, the shadowed wingspan of a bird flying off before the camera's lens could catch her. Coyote Dream 2. It has been weeks since Coyote slipped out of my fenced-in days that now began with longing for her, a carnivore who cut her teeth on the raw edges of my heart, crimping the protective outer layer like it were pie crust. Absence. Your path now, well beyond light years, won't tell me why you perished so soon after your arrival. On the roof, I fine-tune the antenna to pick up your signal, but hear only the breaking of my heart. And I will close with this poem. Somewhere it is morning. somewhere, somewhere, somewhere. And a warm washcloth opens my eyes to a land that does not require passports to reach you. There, purple garlic flowers lean towards, yes, the sun furthest away from where I am without you. Summer clouds cover fields of hope, moments with you I may never love more than I do right now. Thank you.
Poetic peeps and gentle persons, and betweeners and nonconformers, genders all and genders equal. We've reached the end of this special in-between episode of Eat the Storms, the poetry podcast. Celebrating season 8's Behind the Storms conversations. Today my very special guest was Karen Pierce Gonzalez, and you can find out all about Karen over at eatthestorms.com. Just click on listen to the podcast section and there you will find a blog post for every episode. This was In Between with Karen Pierce Gonzalez. And a reminder that this episode first aired on the 17th of February 2024. While you are over at the website, do check out the submissions page for the journal, our Journal of Poetry, Prose and Visual Arts. We are currently open for submissions for issue 4. We're supported by Dublin, UNESCO City of Literature, and our theme therefore is Dublin Days, from city to shore and across the sea. We are looking for your take of this blue city. Were you born here? Were you brought up here? Did you move here? Have you always wanted to come here, or waiting to hear from your tales of this city? And with us, that's it from the podcast today. We are available on platforms like Spotify, Apple, Google, Breaker, Podbean, Player FM, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Castbox, Podcast Addicts, iTunes, Apple Music and YouTunes. My name is Damien B. Donnelly, and until we meet again, keep writing, keep reading, keep listening, keep supporting, and most importantly, make sure that you all stay bloody poetic.